May the words of my lips and the meditation of our hearts be now and always acceptable in your sight, O God, our strength and our Redeemer. Amen. Whenever I hear today's gospel, my mind always goes back to a chapel service that I attended during my seminary days in Saskatoon. A guest preacher was invited for the midweek service in the college chapel. And he was a young priest, of all things, with long hair, of all things, and a motorcycle, of all things, and a reputation for shocking his congregation. The text that day was the cleansing of the temple, the very same passage we just heard from John's Gospel. So after the gospel was proclaimed, he got up and he came down the middle aisle of the chapel. He started waving his arms about, telling us to get out, grabbing one or two people by the shoulder, and physically pulling them up and telling them to get going. Go on, get out of here. We were all shocked. There we were, all dressed up and come to church, the choir in place, and the altar all decked out. And here is some fierce, long-haired zealot making a loud commotion. Then Jesus made a whip of cords and drove the dealers and the money changers out of the temple, sheep, cattle, and all. He upset the tables of the money changers, scattering their coins. Then he turned on the dealers in pigeons. Take them out, he said. You must not turn God's house into a market. Some of them said, what sign can you show as authority for your action? Destroy this temple, Jesus said, and in 3 days I will raise it again. Back in Saskatoon, our very own real-life zealot went on for a few minutes until eventually he calmed down and told everyone he had kicked out that they could come back into the church. He then went on with his sermon, the rest of the sermon that I can't remember anything about. The only thing after that I do remember was sitting there thinking how lucky I was that I didn't sit at the end of the pew right next to the aisle that day. If Jesus is going to show up, I'd rather that he focus on their sins and not on mine. My guess is we don't usually think of Jesus as being this mad. It's true that Matthew, Mark, and Luke also tell this story in their Gospels, but they carefully place it towards the end of their Gospel. And there at the end, during the last week of his life, you can kind of understand the rage of Jesus. What with his critics picking and poking at him for months, if not years, trying to entrap him. His rage is excusable. The final tortured lashing out of one whose patience has finally been overcome by their cruelty. But here, less than 2 chapters into John's Gospel, there is no way to explain away Jesus' rage. At this point, no one has said a word against him. Everyone has been quite impressed, in fact, with him, marveling when he turned water into wine. So you can't explain this anger by saying that they've pushed Jesus to the limit, or he is at last at his wits' end with their opposition. This outburst in the temple in John's Gospel was early, at the beginning, right at the very start. So what do you make of him standing there? White hot fury, whip in hand, kicking over their tables, squawking birds set loose, clanging coins hitting the floor. Can you hear him scream? Get this stuff out of here. Can you feel the chaos, the absolute utter chaos of tables turning and people running and dealers yelling and dust rising? In the temple, of all places, at the Passover of all times. But as shocked as I might be by all of this mayhem, I'm actually grateful that it's here. I'm grateful that Jesus isn't always that nice young man from the Middle East, come to turn the water into wine or to invite a few fisher folk to join his prayer group. I'm grateful that God isn't always an English gentleman, as somebody once put it. I'm grateful for this outrage, this fury, this chaos. I'm grateful that Jesus shares this natural and human emotion that flares in our veins whenever we see injustice or hypocrisy. Anger. St. Augustine once said that hope has two beautiful daughters, anger and courage. Anger so that what must not be cannot be, and courage so that what can be will be. In other words, hope is grounded in an anger at the way things are and the courage to make things better. I read recently about a speech that then President Bill Clinton once made at George Washington Hospital in Washington, D.C. on World AIDS Awareness Day. In the middle of the speech, he was interrupted by a person with AIDS who screamed at the president for not doing enough to stop this horrible plague. He called the president all sorts of derogatory names using choice words. And many in the audience tried to silence the angry man. But the president said, "Let him go. I don't take this personally. Thank God he is still angry. Thank God he still has rage. Because where there is rage, there is hope." Another reason I'm grateful for this story about the cleansing of the temple is because it's messy. I understand this morning is your annual meeting. And I know from experience that annual meetings can get messy from time to time. Not saying that happens at Trinity, but at some of the churches I've been at, yes, they've gotten messy. Can you imagine what it would happen if someone raised this kind of ruckus as you looked through your budget? I mean, not just a, a polite question about a certain item on the budget or some suggestion, maybe to consider this or to consider that. I mean, a real drawn-out, flaming hot, yelling match at all the money going, I don't know, to the boiler or to the shingles on the roof or photocopier maintenance. It would be an annual meeting that would go down in history. You'd all be talking about it for decades to come. What a mess. What fear. What chaos. And we don't, as a rule, like chaos. In fact, we avoid it. But we are surrounded by it, and we live in the midst of it. Some of us more so than others. All I have to do is think of my basement, or my attic, or my garage, or just look at your desk, or that junk drawer in your kitchen, or your checkbook, or your schedule. That's what I mean when I say that we live in the midst of it. But perhaps the mess in your life is more significant. Perhaps we daily face the chaos of an illness and an uncertain future. Perhaps we're watching our family fall apart and we don't feel that there's anything we can do about it. Perhaps you wonder how on earth you're going to get through this month's bills. Perhaps we feel defeated, deflated, despairing. Is this all there is? Is my life nothing more than a meaningless job with no purpose, no joy, no significance? The tables of our lives are often overturned when we least expect it. Things can indeed be amiss. We do not stand in Lent before a weak or anemic God. That would be a pointless thing. Instead, we stand before a God who can be demanding and accusing and angry. Jesus can get mad. But in every case, I wonder if his anger works for us and not against us. God gets angry when women are routine targets of violence and abuse and economic injustice. God gets angry when tyrants strangle the lives of their people. God gets angry when righteous people ignore the addict, the homeless, the hungry, the poor. God gets angry when people die just because of their race or nationality. In every case, it is an anger that can lead to healing, an anger that comes from an eternal and shameless hope that things can be better. That's what keeps us going. No one is angrier about the abusive relationship than God. No one is more frustrated by the economic disparity than God. No one is more shattered by that ugly diagnosis than God. God is on the side of the angry. And with God, you can meet the chaos with hope and with courage. Julie sent me a poem this week that captures in a few lines what I could never capture in a month of sermons. The poem is called Crocus Minded, and it's written by Joe Sorley. It takes courage to be crocus-minded. God, I'd rather wait until June, like wise roses, when the hazards of winter are safely behind and I'm expected, and everything's ready for roses. But crocuses? Highly irregular. Knifing through hard frozen ground and snow, and sticking their necks out because they believe in spring and have something personal and emphatic to say about it. God, I am by nature rose-minded. Even when I have studied the situation here and know there are wrongs that need righting, affirmations that need stating, and know also that my speaking out may offend, for it rocks the boat, well, I'd rather wait until June. Maybe later things will work themselves out, and we won't have to make an issue of it. God, forgive. Wrongs don't work themselves out. Injustices and inequities and hurts don't just dissolve. Someone has to stick her neck out. Somebody who cares enough to think through and work through hard ground because she believes and has something personal and emphatic to say about it. Me, God? Crocus-minded? Could it be that there are things that need to be said and you want me to say them? I pray for courage. Believe in the spring crocus. Believe that no matter how hard the ground is, you need to stick your neck out. Believe in courage and hope. Believe in resilience. Believe that there is order in the chaos. Believe that God is drawing you in, turning you inside out. Believe beyond the mess and prepare yourself for life. Prepare yourself for nothing less than the day of resurrection. Thanks be to God. Amen.